the failures come from the customer, not the vendor, usually. And the reason why is because the customers are complex. The softwares might be complex, but they're matching up to the features and the requirements that the customers need. And usually the talent of the resources that are at the customer are not at the level that is needed or.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our podcast series for which we meet every Friday between 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., depending upon the time zone and the availability of the guest. And today we have a very special guest, one of the top analysts, in the industry. So we are going to get a lot of industry insights in terms of what they are seeing in the market. I'll let him introduce in just a second. But before we do that, some of the things from the logistics perspective, that if you have not checked our previous episodes, we have had phenomenal guests in the past. So go back and check those episodes. And we are bringing in at least 2 or 3 really special guests. They are super solid in their positioning in the market. So, I'm super excited to bring them as well. So stay tuned for those episodes. On that note, Robert, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Sam. This is quite a pleasure, especially on a Friday morning. Robert Kramer, I'm with More Insights and Strategy. I cover enterprise resource planning and anything around it relative to that. Also data, and it's one of those things that affects every enterprise in the world, and it's just a great pleasure to talk about it, especially with you, since you know a lot as well.
Of course, Robert, it's always a pleasure, to do these discussions with peers. So again, honored to have you on this show. So some more things from the audience perspective. We love to create these 3-way conversations. So if you are listening in right now, make sure you guys post your stories, comments, questions, whatever you have in your mind. We just like to hear that, and we are probably going to bring that as part of our discussions as well. We can talk whole day about ourselves, but I think it's far more interesting when we have 3-way conversation. So looking forward to those comments. Now, Robert, obviously this is the time of the year, I guess, in 2024, where everybody's sort of planning their budgets. They want to see, what's coming. I know that, 2024 probably wasn't the year that everybody was expecting. It was slightly different, right? And everybody's hoping that 2025 is probably going to be better. I don't know if you share the same sentiment or not. At least that's what we hear from folks in our customer base. So overall, I guess, from the trend perspective, we are going to start, but we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest. So that is going to be, Robert, your perspective on business growth, especially at this point of time in the year.
Well, I think at some point, the vendors are focusing really heavily on the customers, how to get them modernized. And, if you kind of look back at ERP and what it does for a company and where the majority of the installs are across the globe, I think a majority of them are still on-prem. And the goal is, how do I get off-prem into the cloud? How do I get into a hybrid mode? What are the steps to do that? And I think a lot of the vendors who I work closely with are focused on these great features and the functionality. And you work with the customers, and the customers are probably saying, well, do I really want to take on a transformation project? What does that entail? And when you look at these transformation projects, and by the way, so I started in the ERP world about 30 years ago when it was a turnkey solution on-prem, and I worked for a chemical manufacturing solution that was specifically working with Unix and IBM R6000, and it was actually my father's company. So whether I wanted to do it or not, I did it, and I sat in 1,000 demos, went through all these manufacturing sites, and I kind of learned the mechanics of it and why everything needs to be put together a certain way. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. But I actually I know I'm kind of going in circles, but that was a little simpler from a governance perspective and a
Yeah.
control perspective. And now we have all these SaaS applications, all these new innovations. And so when a customer looks at it, how do they get from here to there when a vendor saying, hey, here's my shiny new car, but the vendor's like, I got 15 facilities, I'm in over 4 regions across the globe, and I'm on-prem on an old, SAP system. They're giving me all the tools to uh, to modernize, but how do I get my act together? And so what I see going forward for 2025 is establishing data management, and how do I get my data in order? Once I have my data in order, then all these amazing innovations I can take advantage of. But I first have to have change management put in place, because if I don't know how I'm going to do it, how am I going to fix my data? Now, one thing that I can ask you is, I'm seeing silo projects happening with these companies where, one branch does it and then it doesn't go forward with the other ones, which is a major problem because, when you see the light at the end of the tunnel and it's done for the whole company, you can start taking advantage of these amazing innovations, which we'll talk about why they're so important as we continue down this road. But I'm seeing the modernization is one of the key things that has to happen next year, because these companies need to have these systems where they're not a bona fide operational ERP system. They're more of a differentiator. And if they're a differentiator, then it's a competitive advantage for them, and they can be making key decisions based upon their AI, and not just an inventory that they're just pulling and picking and shipping and billing and all that stuff. They're actually getting AI to actually tell them, here's how you stock your inventory, here's how your supply chain management works based upon disruptions, and that needs to get to the point where it's set up where it's the true meaning of what an ERP is supposed to be. But long-winded answer. What's your thoughts?
It's a very informative answer, and thank you so much for sharing that. And when we start unpacking anything from the ERP perspective, it always gets slightly more long-winded. I wish there was a simple answer to these things. It never is, right?
Yep.
So yeah, and from your perspective, I guess it must be quite a transition. 30 years is a very short time, and going from your world of Unix to your chat GPT right now, generative AI. Things have changed quite a bit.
Yep.
Crazy changes.
Well, what's interesting is, when we were doing those systems, a lot of those companies were going to their first, ERP system, and they were really probably a little simpler to implement. But we went through the same change management. We always said, like, you had to have full buy-in from the top down. You had to have, those outliers involved. It had to be transparency all the way through. It was kind of like, Sam, if you go home tonight and your wife changes, the living room to the dining room to the living room,
I'm gonna be so mad.
You walk in, you're like, what's going on here? But it might have been for the better, because you know what, it didn't look good the other way, or it's just more functional. But it takes you 2 weeks to get over it. This is what these people are going through, because Amy or Betty or Bill or John might be handling inventory control for one of the branches on an Excel spreadsheet. It works. Everybody gets it. They do such a fabulous job. They have all these, great lookups. Everybody gets it. The shipping people love it. It tells the procurement how to order, et cetera. And it's all great, right? It isn't great because it's not flowing through the system. It's not real time. And what happens if that person's out of town? What happens if they're sick? This is what was happening 30 years ago, and I think it's still happening. And I think companies are doing things outside of the ERP system that is better for them, but not better for the system. And I think the key is, how do we get these systems where they're more used than 50%? And if they're used more than 50%, then it's what we talked about. It's more of a differentiator. But the modernization is a big key to be taking advantage of some of these great innovations that these vendors have spent a lot of time implementing into the systems that they've developed.
Yeah. So Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective. And to be completely honest, I mean, and I don't know how many people were expecting to hear about change management when you talk about the ERP trends. Right now, when people, think of the ERP trends, I think, they are going to be, hey, give me more technology. You're going to have more technology. You
Yep.
probably don't need change management, right? And that's why we but it's the opposite. The more technology is going to advance, the change management is going to be more important, I guess. And that's what you are leaning towards, unless I'm misreading it.
Yeah, I mean, there's amazing innovations out there, and obviously the agents are huge. I think that one of the things everybody has to take in consideration is, Industry 5.0 takes advantage of humans and robots working together versus, a lot of times the AI agents are not necessarily with the humans. I guess it could be with or without. And
Yep.
I think it's beneficial for the Industry 5.0 to show that human involvement is critical to making sure that those tasks or those workflows are done, processes, et cetera, with some human intervention, or you're trusting that workflow without the human. So I think that's a major innovation. The cloud is a major trend as well, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I see sustainability is not necessarily the metrics that you might think of it, emission data, et cetera, but more of a practice. How do I get my company globally to be able to have a better carbon footprint practice? These emission controls. So when I talk about sustainability, and some of the major vendors we can talk about have it or getting to have, putting it implemented, but we're talking about all the way from manufacturing, transportation, to all the way through the end to end, controlling the emissions, the efficiency of your operations, and what you would need to have that because of the regulatory compliances that are coming down. Specifically, they're in Europe, but they will be in the United States at some point. And if you do not have your ERP modernized, this might be a manual or outside of the system process, that you'll be doing. So I see that as not necessarily a trend, but a need. So, what are you seeing? Because I know you work with the customers a lot, and I work more with the vendors. What are they saying on the ground?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I completely agree with you overall in terms of trends, and we are going to discuss, more in detail in each of those. Sustainability is a big topic. There is no question about that. We might have little nuances in terms of what we are hearing versus what you are hearing, I guess. So that's what is going to be really interesting. But let's, discuss on the change management aspect a little bit more, if you're okay with
Sure.
that.
Oh, any which way you want.
Yeah. So, from the vendor's perspective, and the reason why this episode is really interesting, and I don't know, one term that I recently heard, from Brian Sommer, I believe, and you are probably connected with him as well. Brian Sommer, do you know him from
Yep. Yep.
Diginomica? Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, so we were talking. John Reed was there, Brian was there, and the whole analyst community. And sometimes, I mean, from our perspective, we are more of the kind of buy side analyst, and that is the term that he coined, from the Wall Street perspective. You guys are slightly more, sell side, because you are obviously working with the vendors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of interesting the way. So I always like to see this as more of the offense and defense, right? That we are bringing very, very, very different perspective, right? And that's why this episode is really interesting, because we are coming from two completely different worlds. And we are seeing if this is gonna sort of tie together. So one of the things that we generally hear from our customer base, okay, you are agreeing that, okay, change management is really important. Change management should be priority, even if technology is going to advance, even if you are going to have AI agents. Change management is not optional, right? That's what, like, I don't know any company that is going to argue that. You can probably downplay that. But this is something that we don't hear as much from the vendors, to be completely honest. And I don't know if this is happening at the ground or at the corporate level, because sometimes there could be misalignment there as well.
There's definitely misalignment because it's touched over so much, I think, by the vendors because they're talking a lot about the features and hey, this is the next version that we have. But change management is complex. I actually wrote an article about it. I can send it to you to include it in the show notes. But it's nothing to skim over, and it's complex. And I will say this: that most failures of of implementation from my perspective, because I did do implementations when I was working for the chemical manufacturing ERP. The failures come from the customer, not the vendor, usually. And the reason why is because the customers are complex. The softwares might be complex, but they're matching up to the features and the requirements that the customers need. And usually the talent of the resources that are at the customer are not at the level that is needed, or they think it's not as I guess I think it's going to be like an easier transformation than it really is. And generally it comes down to the data and how they get the data over, how quality is the data. And then the staff, usually they don't have the staff at a level that is capable of doing it, meaning not capable of doing their job and the transformation at the same time. And we used to tell people, hey, bring in temps to do the job. Let the people who are working in those roles do the implementation so they can not only understand the new system and get trained, but make sure to double check it. So I think it's a huge issue, and it's not as detailed as it needs to be. But the companies that are successful, those ones have put the right change management in place. But nothing gets out of the gate without change management, because all it's going to do is crash and burn. So
exactly, and that's where I guess that the real disconnect is, because what is happening, and I'll tell you, from the ground, because we deal primarily at the rep level, right? Because obviously this is a very, very, very competitive space in general, like ERP. People are struggling to sell, right? So they have to do whatever they have to do, to be able to sell. And sometimes, I mean, they, especially with newer technologies, they are going to argue that with cloud, with APIs, with AI, it's all going to be magical. Okay, everything is going to integrate magically, but
we want it to be. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, luck and ease is, I mean, I would love that, but what happens is if you do it the wrong way, you got to go back and do it again, and twice as hard the second time. So that prep and making sure that the processes are put in place is so critical up front, or else that trickle down is an enormous, you got to go back in time and do it again. So it's a horrible, loss to do it the wrong way first.
Exactly, and it's going to be painful for everybody, I guess, involved in the process. So I don't know, what is the point of doing that, to be completely honest. But that's what ends up happening. I don't know whose fault that is, but I mean, that's the reality.
It's the CIO. It's the person making the decision. They have to understand and be prepped to how difficult it is. And many times they will know, and they'll have their ducks in a row, but it has to be a streamlined approach, and they just have to roll up their sleeves and get it done. But the benefits are so fantastic by having an ERP system that is modernized. And the reason why is these technology stacks have gotten out of control. And the technology stacks are, companies are buying a different technology for probably technology they might already have inherent in the modern ERP that they haven't transformed yet, right? So if they can correct that and get their technology stack reduced and have their vendors, they don't want to do just one vendor, obviously, and have all their eggs in one basket, but set it up correctly. I think that their governance security will be in a better place. The regulatory will be at a better place, and taking advantage of more of a streamlined, more efficient ERP system. So the technology will come if you can get those things put in place first. But to do it the reverse way, which I think a lot of companies are doing, I think it's kind of it's set up for not success. Let's put it that way. I'm sure I don't want to say the word failure, but it's a hill to climb doing it backwards. And I think that maybe the vendors are promoting that the features and functionality are, hey, let's jump in this car, but you didn't know you had to sell your car to afford the new car. So anyway, that's just a thought. But the customers from your angle, are they scared to, or they think that the transformation is too daunting for them? They don't have the staff in place. The technology isn't at a high enough level for them to jump on the bandwagon. What are you seeing, and what's the consistency that's amongst them?
Yeah, so to be completely honest, and that's a great question. If I think from their shoes, and I always like to think from their shoes, okay, where are they? I mean, any changes? Look, in this year, especially if you talk about 2024, it's been a very, very, very difficult year for everybody, including the executives. We can blame CIOs all day, but the reality is that, I mean, they have to work really hard to save their jobs. Okay, and if you are going to take a project of this magnitude and nature, unless that is coming from board, from corporate, they are making some sort of changes. It's a risk. It's really a risk.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are so many things that could go wrong with these projects, so you really need to empathize with them. And then what is happening in the market, that, okay, if you look at, if I were getting pitched from 2000 different vendors, I will get so confused, to be completely honest. And that's the state that they are in. They're super confused. Okay, every single rep that is going to them, they are saying, "Hey, don't worry about it. Let's sign the contract. We'll take care of you." And after that, they are simply going to disappear. We all know this. You know how
Yep.
this works, right? We all do this. Nobody is exception here, right? But the reality is that these
Understood.
guys have to own it. Okay, and getting
Yep.
any sort of business value from technology is obviously going to be extremely hard. These projects are not meant to be done in the short term nature. And again, from the executive perspective, it might be okay, they might champion it, they might push it. But when it goes to, let's say, at the CFO level, CEO level, board level, these guys, they are really struggling to meet their quarterly numbers. And when you are going to talk about something that is going to happen in the next 3 years, it's a very hard lift.
Yep.
Very, very, very hard lift for them, right? So number one, they are not educated right, in my personal experience, and that's been the state of the industry, I guess, for last 20, 30 years. Technology has come the long way, but I don't think the right education and the right mindset exist where everybody's sort of taking the accountability of whatever they are saying, I guess. And then really coaching the right things, that, hey, buddy, okay, I know that this is going to be expensive, but you need to really think through what is involved with this before you sort of take this decision, because otherwise what's going to happen is very similar to what you described. Okay, number one, you are not going to get much of the business value. Okay, if somebody is investing some money, they have to make some money. If they are not making money, what's the point of all of this? Right? And maybe 50-60% cases, they don't go so well. I mean, somebody gets blamed. I don't know who that is, but somebody is getting blamed in all of this. And you are absolutely right that if you look at the adoption, of the software right now, maybe 20%, maybe 30% of these enterprise systems, nobody is using that. Okay, and then
Right.
you are paying so much in the licensing, so obviously there's a little frustration inside. They are not going to tell you, but there is.
Well, that's a good point. I also see some trends that, so say, for example, there's 2/3 of these enterprise systems are on-prem, but if companies are only using 40%, 50% max, I think it's probably 40% of their ERP, it's really not giving them the tools to grow the business in the right way, right? And I think that's extremely critical to perspective of how do I use my system. If I'm going to go through this major transformation, it has to be used correctly. But one trend that I like is consumption-based pricing,
Yeah,
and some of the companies are going to that. And what this does is, instead of a user base, it's based upon use by anybody.
yeah,
And but you set the minimums to where the vendor has to get XYZ. So maybe that's equivalent to 20 users, a month on the system. But this way I can get more involved in the ERP. And that's where the ERP shines, is that more people are touching and utilizing it and putting data in, getting data out. And then it's more of a enterprise system that's really helping the efficiency of that operation grow. Um, I think it's a big deal. And then this really goes to the supply chain. And I briefly touched on this, but just quickly, that's a major trend, because with production probably a little flat in the world, and cost of raw materials going up, right? Supply chain is a major component of where you can actually get some of this money back, right? So if
yeah,
your supply chain is handling these disruptions, handling these issues with logistics, and picking the correct transportation and routes, and ability to get it there at the least cost, that's helping these customers or the companies grow, or at least save money where they're losing it potentially in production. But you have to be modernized to get to that, or you're using a tool outside of your system.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think great insights, and I think regarding your comments related to pricing, and pricing is one of the trend that we are forecasting that there are probably going to be massive changes.
Yep.
Overall in terms of how the enterprise software is being priced today and how that is going to be priced tomorrow. Because again, 2024 was very different. Everybody sort of struggling for revenue, so they have to figure out ways of making up that revenue somehow. And one of the obviously strategies will be pricing, which is going to have impact for everybody. So consumption-based pricing, right? It's been a hot topic. Everybody's sort of arguing towards that it's probably a fair pricing. And I'll tell you, what happens in the ground from the customer perspective, because Robert, as you know, we are on the buy side, right? If there is something that has real tangible business benefit, then we really want to commercialize that. We really want to coach that to the customers, and we want to help the vendors as well. But consumption-based pricing is tricky, okay? And sometimes it becomes very hard for us to defend that as well, to be completely honest, okay? So I'll give you some stories from our experience, and then maybe you are going to have some stories from your perspective as well, okay? So, for example, let's say you go to a vendor, looks good, great on paper. One of the differentiators that they have touted in their marketing material is consumption-based pricing, right? That you are not paying as much, you are sort of not logged in. But the reality is that you are still kind of logged in, right? And the second thing is predicting and computing that consumption-based pricing becomes very difficult, from the finance perspective. As a CFO, if I'm the CFO, I need to know what I'm paying today. I need to know what I'm going to pay tomorrow. I need to, build my model so that I can keep my cash. I don't care whether that is going to be 10% expensive, 20% expensive, as long as I'm not getting some sort of surprises here.
Sure.
Okay. So as long as you are sort of making the fair arrangement, we are probably going to be okay with that. But with consumption-based pricing, okay, again, even though it sounds great on paper, but what happens in reality is very different. Okay. So number one is that, let's say if I go to a vendor who is super solid on consumption-based pricing, they have their whole algorithm down. I do a quote today. Okay. And my customer is asking me for ballpark. Okay. Hey, you do these engagements on a daily basis. Please tell me how much it's going to cost. All right. I do my numbers. Okay. Maybe 100,000, maybe 200,000. I give them some ballpark. Okay. Next day I go for the code. It's going to be completely different. Same customer. How did we get here?
That's interesting. So I'm not sure why the numbers would be like that, but I will tell you, consumption-based pricing, chances are at ROI is a little bit better because you're going to be, and it's probably more of an indirect ROI because you're going to be using more of the system. Okay. So instead of that 40 to 50%, you're going to probably be at a much higher level of the ERP. I personally think it's a no-brainer. Just work out the cost, because if I own that manufacturing company, I want to get everybody on the system. And I know for a fact from an experience perspective, we'll be using more of the system. And it's my pleasure to pay the vendor that money because I'm going to maximize the system and with efficiencies, and having all these people with John and Amy who run the Excel spreadsheet now are using it, John and shipping, and, Bill, another Bill, or, Pat's using it now, and, environmental, and doing all his regulatory. This is a way to utilize the system in a different fashion that I think traditionally has been done. I will tell you, I think the consumption is just too new that companies just aren't used to that. And if the pricing is not truthful, I guess that's what you're saying, or doesn't pencil the way that you expected it to be, then maybe that's throwing them off a little bit. But I would advise to get there, to get as many people involved and get these systems where they're utilized.
Yeah. So one thing I'll tell you that, what I'm not trying to suggest that anybody is not being honest or whatever. It's the predictability aspect of the price, and that's what price is supposed to mean. That, if I'm paying something as a customer, I need to compare 5 different vendors. I need to know, who's going to be the cheapest. Obviously that's in my best interest as a buyer, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I need to know, okay, what I'm going to be paying in next 5 years. I don't care, how you model your price, what is going to be algorithm, consumption-based, user-based, but I'm looking for some sort of apple-to-apple comparison. Okay. I'll give you one more story. Obviously in this particular case, it's not that it's not the layers, I guess, or the algorithm that is not clear, but sometimes that might not be clear from the customer architecture perspective. The architecture is going to have, the data is going to be all over the place. Sometimes they are not even going to tell you, how many different sales orders they have.
Sure.
They told 1,000, but actually they ended up being 10,000. They didn't know what is a sales order. Sometimes they don't know what is a sales line. So there could be layers in that. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where there is a little misalignment, confusion, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I might have misunderstood you. But also going that consumption and going to the cloud also gives you the chance to have a lot of the trends for the vendors are going industry specific. Not that they haven't already had that, but they're focusing on that. And what they're doing is embedding processes within a certain industry. So if it's manufacturing or healthcare, or financial or retail or transportation, you might have thousands of customers. They might have thousands of customers that are already on that have processes. So we might already have these forms, the way that we do our work orders, the way that we do our scheduling, the way that we might, do our procurement. And I think that that's critical to stay away from customizations, which we all know are important. But when you do customizations, today you got to think of it as a cost, but tomorrow you have to think of it as a major problem. And then how do you overcome that problem? I would say unless you've patented something that has to be that way, you might want to think about those larger vendors that have those processes that might be an advantage for you to learn a new way to run your business. And that's that change management again. But that's why these things are so complex.
Exactly, could not agree more. I mean, it's never going to be easy, estimating that, defining the architecture. Again, the more work that you are going to put in, the more predictable pricing you are going to have, but you are sort of short-circuiting the process in the front end. So you sort of don't know what you are getting into. You have a lot of blind spots, and then obviously you are going to get a lot of surprises later on, and then somebody's going to get blamed, when things don't turn out as per the expectation. Again, it's...
Well, the problem is, like today, when you do these transformations, they say they can't live without it. I understand it, and it's a big deal, and that's the way they do business. But they're acting almost like in a stubborn way. It goes back to what we said: the customer's complex, not the vendor. And I get it. And all of a sudden, fast forward 3-5 years, and there's these amazing, new innovations. Someone said AI, right? They said sustainability. They said all these new things that are coming out, blockchain, these new security, tools. But I have to upgrade my system and make a decision on that great, change that I made to the system. What do I do now? So that's one of those things that you're better off listening to the vendor and what they're able to tell you. So I know that we're probably running short on time, but what do you tell the customers when you're advising them on that subject?
On pricing?
No, on the customizations.
On customization, I mean, our take is going to be very similar to what vendors are saying, to be completely honest and fair. Okay, that do not ever customize. Okay, what you should not be customizing at all. Okay, whatever customizations that need to happen, number one, you should be thinking about how you can streamline your data, how you can streamline your processes. Now the challenge becomes, and this is the industry-wide problem, and we always like to, WBS Talks is a very open forum. We always like to talk about, okay, how can we solve this for the industry? Okay, let's be honest here. Okay, obviously everybody's sort of selling some sort of offering, but how can we have the honest conversation, right? So from our perspective, we always say that they need to invest a lot more time upfront in the phase 0, in the preparation phase, because there is no way else to know what you are going to get in sort of the technical phase or the implementation phase or whatever you want to work there, right? But the challenge is that, so from customers' perspective, they are already feeling that, oh my goodness, millions of dollars here. Okay, and I don't know when I'm going to get the ROI. And let's say if I do the selection phase or whatever, and obviously there is a lot of noise in the market. I mean, like million consulting companies, and they all have their own sort of versions and stories, and sometimes they have good experiences, sometimes they have bad experiences, right?
Sure.
And it becomes very tricky, for the customer. So from our perspective, I would say we always say that, okay, if you want real assurance on the price, okay, if you want real assurance on whether this is going to work or not, okay, do not ever customize. Don't even think about that. With cloud, it's much harder. With on-prem, whatever you could have done, okay, it's going to be a very different architecture. You have no idea what you are getting into. It's going to fire back pretty bad if you try to mimic whatever you had in your on-prem. That's
of course.
Be upfront about that.
Of course. And I'm seeing a couple of things. First of all, I think hybrid's a major, running a 2-tier system is a great way to go from on-prem to cloud, or in the middle, right? So you have some of the modules in the cloud. But I will tell you, and maybe this is a disagreement, I think price is really not a big of an issue as is being made out to be, because these customers need to select the right vendor, the vendor that has industry experience that they actually trust, and then their data flows from different areas, from whether it's the ERP to the HCM to the CRM to other areas that vendor is able to offer software tools and a platform that helps them out. But because we go from that 40% again to that 75% use, and then that 30% that you're getting back makes up that difference in price, but it's not on paper, and these companies are doing too much of an Excel spreadsheet showing where their costs are going out the door, but it does ROI with the efficiency at that 75%. So
yeah, could not agree more. And again, I don't think the technology itself can get them the business value. They need to do a lot, and that is something that is not being coached in the industry. And it's not. And we always say this. Okay, look, whatever technology you are implementing, okay, it doesn't matter. And sometimes people argue that okay, ERPs are difficult. No, 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 no. Okay, any enterprise software category, okay, you are going to touch, it's going to be terribly difficult unless you are using a very siloed software, that can be managed at the departmental level. But you are not going to get much of the business transformation if that's what you're looking for. So we always say this, okay, you are buying a machine is extremely powerful. Okay, there's no question there. Okay, but to be able to really use the machine effectively, you need to spend a lot of time. You need subject matter expertise. Not every customer is going to have that. So you need to really think about that. Okay, how you are going to get that subject matter expertise. Obviously, it gets very expensive, but you need to invest this first before you can get anything out of it, I guess.
Well, these are mission critical systems. These run your business. If it's down, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And what else is more important than the production, shipping, receiving, billing, collecting the money, adhering to rules, regulations, governance, security? If I know CRMs are a big deal, but if that's down, is that a big deal? I still can sell. But if my ERP's down, I got a major problem. So if you put the time in, you get the data right, what I just said about the mission critical, you'll get it back. And that's why I think we have to go back to the basics and get this data management under control. Precursor to that is the change management. And then we can modernize, take advantage of these amazing, innovations that are out there, because we're at a point where the vendors have really spent the time to get these innovations embedded into the system. But there's a gap between where the customers are at and the vendors. We got to get that closer, where the companies are able to really get more out of what they have in their operational systems.
Yeah, so very interesting. So let's go back to some of the other layers that we wanted to really hit on. I guess AI and sustainability are two topics that are really, really big overall from the trend perspective. And I don't know what you are forecasting. Everybody, some people are super excited. Some people are like, okay, I mean, it's going to take some time, slow down, I guess. So where do you stand, Robert, in your commentary? Let's say if you forecast, okay, what are we going to see tangibly, I guess, from the AI perspective? Is it going to be big inside the product? Are we going to experience, let's say, if I'm the CFO, am I going to have real change in my life, I guess?
Well, I think AI is gigantic, and I think that it's all predicated on the things that I just mentioned. And data management, if the data is not set up right, AI will be as successful as that data is inside your ERP. Although the major vendors are putting or embedding AI within the systems of record, which is the ERP. The one thing about AI is, traditionally in the past, we had what's called just-in-time inventory, which was a way to manage the right inventory levels at a certain point to make sure that, I didn't buy or overproduce, et cetera. But there's a reason why there's sales, is because I didn't do a good job at that, right? So when I have AI embedded into the system, it will base my inventory control off of historical data, off of supply and demand, off of cross-selling capabilities, and then that AI will filter all the way through to supply chain. Well, it will help me ship it the right way. And can you imagine how successful a business could be if they were able to take advantage of that system like that? So I see that as being a major thing. And then this will trickle down to the sustainability, which I think is going to be huge. Now, I'm sure most companies are following this, but it's a big deal globally, and it will be a mandate. I'm predicting this. And this is why a lot of the major vendors are starting this process now or already have it. If they don't, they're going to have it. But the customers who are those 2/3 on-prem are at a disadvantage because they won't be able to do it inherent in their existing ERP because they're not modernized. So they'll be doing it on a one of those SaaS applications that um, does not filter, or they're going to have to kind of use an API to make it work correctly. But to modernize and do it the way that we talked about is going to be necessary because this will be a mandate at some time. But once you want to have the sustainability practice, if you were a growing business, if you were a leader in your industry, this is and set the trends. So those are some of the immediate things that I see. But I see the AI as being just a strong role for ERP with the system of record being at a level that it needs to be to take advantage of those tools.
Yeah, so very interesting. So let's talk about sustainability first, and then we'll probably come back to AI a little bit more as well. Okay, so obviously right now, and I don't know whether you sort of review this more from the policy changes perspective as well, but there are going to be a lot of changes in terms of the reporting requirements, in terms of the regulatory requirement, and depending upon where the election is, I guess, things might be different. Every country is going to have different positioning. Some are already super afraid. They are blocking pretty much everything.
Yep.
I would say North America is slightly liberal in general with these things. They need to monitor a little bit, what's happening, what are the implications. If we don't have a real evidence, then there is no point in blocking right now. I mean, that's the sense that I get, at least, based on what I hear, from the government perspective. So, but obviously there are going to be challenges, right? We all know this. We have seen some newer challenges. CrowdStrike is one of them, which was a massive challenge this year. So most likely we are going to see a lot more next year as well, whether you talk about cybersecurity, etc. So overall, I guess, from the policy perspective, we are touching on sustainability, but there might be implications on other processes as well, based on how these requirements are going to change, and they are going to impact the ERP industry, ERP processes, ERP products as well. So where do you see these policy changes, number one, impacting sustainability and everything else?
Well, I see. I mean, what is a company going to do if they're doing business with like a Walmart, just as an example, and I'm just throwing this out there, and they say, we need you in order to be a supplier to us, adhere to these standards of emission control, and we need it to be, connected to our system. And, I think they're notorious for using, EDI and other elements to communicate back and forth. I'm sure there's newer technologies, and you're going to need to be able to do it this way. I remember 20 years ago when, companies like Walmart said, we will not accept an order unless it's XYZ this way. And if it's not right, then we're not going to do business with you. I see it being extreme that mandates are in order for compliancy on certain elements of production by certain vendors doing business with, other vendors. So like a Walmart is an example. I see controls from the government being in place that you have to be at these standards in order from a compliancy perspective to actually, be in business. And if you're going to not have vendors that you're working with that have these actual, modules or, features, I think that you're going to be doing it manually or outside of the system. So I see this as being a major thing. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did, and I'm going to have some more layers that I may be able to peel there, right? And it gets very interesting, I guess, just the sustainability conversation itself, right? Because everybody's sort of writing in their marketing material, everybody is going to have some sort of sustainability capabilities. And even if you talk about just one vendor, okay, name any vendor, okay, whether you are going to be SAP, Oracle, Infor, and I don't know, Robert, whether you work with just one person, with that vendor, or you are working with multiple teams. But they are like siblings. They are fighting with each other, to be completely honest, okay? Sometimes what they are going to argue is, hey, P2P system, procure to pay, is the system that should be having the sustainability functionality. The scenario that you had mentioned, they are going to argue that, hey, that belongs to procurement. Now my ERP guy is going to argue that, the sustainability functionality is going to be there, right? So sometimes there could be a conflict in this as well. So overall, I guess, who should have these capabilities? Where should they belong? What do customers need to do? I guess overall from the trend perspective. So do you see one particular category having the sustainability capabilities a lot more than the other categories, or are they all going to have some sort of functionality? Where
It
do you
needs to be
stand on
end.
that?
It needs to be end to end. But one of the things that some of these vendors have, and that I really like, is these user groups where they listen to their customers and they get the features that they need, and then they're involved in the global missions with the COP29, et cetera, and some of the other regulatory associations. It's end to end. It's not just one. It can't be one. It has to be, from the production to the operations to, the transportation to picking a supplier, the suppliers that have, adhered to the raw material controls for sustainability, that they transport it in a, in a way that's a green method, that they give you the ability that your machines are running at a efficiency level of XYZ. I mean, it's all the way through. And I think that this is new, but it's a better way forward. I think it's going to kind of, it might separate some of these companies a little bit of where they stand and how far they are along. Because I think some of the vendors are further along than others, and some say they're there and they're not. And I do think the customers need to get off the ball and say, have the foresight to say, I need to be modernized. I need to get my practice at a certain level. How do I do it? Because if they don't, I'm not going to be ready for Walmart telling me I'm going to need to do this, this, and this at this date. And or just that's just an example, whoever they do business with. But it's at a major level. You have companies, these global pharmaceutical companies who have modernized, who are using this as a competitive advantage. They're all over this because that industry is regulated severely. But then you have companies that are, like it might be just a furniture manufacturer, and they might say like, well, we don't need to get to it right now. I'm not saying I have an example that I know that, but I'm just saying these are things that are real, and owners of these companies, CIOs, need to understand that these ERPs are made to make your operations more efficient, and you just have to see where your requirements are at and pick the right vendor, and then go as far as you can go. But long-winded answer: sustainability is a major topic and will never go away right now.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think there are going to be a lot of changes, and there are going to be a lot of changes in the product, categories, architecture. And I think I agree with your point, previous point that you had mentioned that if you are going to be on-prem, I don't know what you are hearing from the vendors. They might not talk about it, especially if they are still selling, on-prem systems right now. I mean, sometimes there is a conflict among their teams as well. One team is. Go ahead, Robert.
No, I mean, I've talked to customers at events, and I think they're scared to death to go off of on-prem just from it's just comfortable.
Yeah.
They can see it. It just makes sense to them. It's the security. But I think the hybrid model, it makes a lot of sense if the vendors can sell, we're going to put these modules, in the cloud. We'll do, our transformation will go this way based upon, your comfort level. And it makes the most sense to put, this process in the cloud, these processes stay on-prem, get the best of both worlds. But some of the intelligence capabilities is a huge thing, because then you take that data to a different level, and being able to use that data where it's more of a, like I said, competitive advantage versus more of an operational tool. That's what you're trying to get to, and then taking advantage of some of these advanced innovations from being part in the cloud. I've talked to a lot of the vendors. They are doing a lot of the hybrids, and I think that that's a key thing, that the vendors don't lose sight of what the customers need. I mean, who's the most important, person in the room? It's the customer. It's What does the customer need? Customer needs to be taken care of. The customer needs innovations. Customer needs to trust you, and if they trust you, then maybe you do the hybrid model, and then eventually you get to that all in the cloud. There's the companies that are ahead of the curve. There's companies that are right behind that, and then there's the ones that are really dragging. And those customers are probably those 2/3 that are on prem right now, and you have to put your time into to seeing where they're at. I've told you in the past that I think when you look at an implementation of an ERP system, it kind of tells you the innovation capabilities of that customer. And meaning that if someone's got 10 locations and it's on-prem and they're on like a 15-year-old version of a ECC SAP, they might not be ready to talk about AI right now.
Yeah.
They might not be, and they want to figure out, what's best for them in their industry. It actually might be sustainability first, but that tells you their capabilities to innovate versus a company that's on the bleeding edge and they've already modernized. They might be your alpha customer that's going to be someone that you test with all the time. And so you have to look at that because you can't just look at every customer as equal. You have to look at their innovation capabilities and their complexity. And because I think that's another layer that tells you, how far they're willing to innovate and how quickly. And you need 1,000 meetings with them to get, to the cloud.
Yeah, so very interesting. So let's go back to the AI conversation. And I like your comment related to whether we are ready for AI or not. And that's the question that everybody needs to answer, I guess. And obviously, there are going to be massive changes. So what are you most excited about AI? And I don't know, if you play unbiased with all of the vendors or if you are able to reveal some of the capabilities that you are excited about, feel free to pitch for your vendors. I mean, there's no problem there. As long as they have real capabilities, I guess.
I'll stay unbiased on that, but all the major vendors, we all know who there are. So you have Microsoft and Oracle and SAP and Infor, and there's a bunch of other ones. And I do feel that AI is a dramatic change because it will help with some of those, those tasks that are just, they're not meaningful, but they're meaningful, right? But AI can help out with that. So I think if your data is set up, it will help streamline a lot of these tasks where it's that industry 5.0 that I go back to, that the humans and the robots work together to help these systems be a lot more efficient. Now, why wouldn't I want AI? It's fantastic. Data's got to be good, and then it makes my system, spin a lot quicker, and it's one of the best, technologies to be embedded into these systems. But we're not truly autonomous. We're not truly able to be let these agents within a system, go off and run unless the data's set up and I trust it. But it will make some of these, minimal processes or tedious processes, probably a better word, a lot more capable of getting them done with the AI agents than they are letting somebody spend all day messing around with journal entries when that could be done by an agent, and then you're just approving them, and then that person is working more on strategy. I don't think we wanted to get rid of jobs. We wanted to make it where the system of record is more successful. And I still think you're going to need all those people. I would hope you would, where it's just going from that 40% to the 75% using these ERP systems. Listen, if you're at 100%, then that's great. I'd like to hear that story. And I'd love to write an article about it. But at the same time, I think it's getting these systems where they're more successful, and AI is a major play for that. But then, like we said, change management, data management, they play a huge role in getting there. What's your flavor on that? What are the customers thinking when you say AI? Are they like all in, or they ask you 1,000 questions to understand how you get there, or are they kind of in between?
I would probably put them in the curious category at this point of time. I don't think anybody is sort of ready to sign a check just because somebody has AI. There might be enterprise customers. Obviously, they are always slightly ahead in the game. Just because they have a lot more money, they want to retain their market share. Mid-market customers, they are not going to have that luxury, in my personal experience. They are slightly late, in the game in general. That's what we hear in the community, to answer your question.
Well, I think it comes down to the following. The features are nice, the functionality, cool. It's business impact. How is this going to make my business better? And if it doesn't, then I'm not interested. This is how, the leaders of these companies are thinking. I need to understand the business impact. If it's great, let's continue, and which it can be, but it's one of those things that you have to sell off of the value versus the features. And if that's done, I used to be in marketing for a long time, and I would see these presentations, and people would show just 20 slides before they get to the business value. And I need to see the business value slide one, and then let's roll it out, what we're going to do to get it right. And if that's done, and you'll have the CEO, the CIO's attention out of the gate, and head of product, et cetera, because they want this. They want to be wowed. They want AI to be amazing for them. They want their ERP to be screaming for them. But I think they're all in a way lost. That's why they're all lost in a way of they don't know how to get this innovation done quickly. And I think that that's the job of like yourselves. How do you streamline the change management and data management to implement these systems where they're comfortable and they trust. And if you have all those things set up, does it really matter how long it takes, or does it matter that it just happens? So
exactly, could not agree more. So I'm probably going to have one final question, and this is going to be slightly fun, question, I guess. Which is the co-pilot versus agent war. From the AI perspective, I don't know whether you followed the story. Salesforce versus Microsoft, they always have this love and hate relationship, is what I described, right? Everybody's sort of trying to blame everybody that no, your agents are not agents. They are probably co-pilots or co-pilots. It's all over the place overall in terms of the story, right? So where do you stand in that? I mean, what is more meaningful from the business perspective? Co-pilot, agents, tell us more about that, I guess, what customers should be thinking about.
I think they're both a similar story. I think it's a matter of what the customers need, instead of what the vendors are telling them they need. At the same time, they're both, great features and functionality that will help the customers, be more successful. But, one thing, not to say anything negative about any of the vendors, but like the CRMs and like the Salesforces, there's a lot to be set up in there in order for the agents to work, and the co-pilot, et cetera, in those applications. And I just think that the customers these are great stories, but the customers are seeing too many stories of these innovations and not understanding of how I get there. And that's the one thing I think is not laid out. Like, companies might talk about co-pilot, they might talk about the AI agents, but what's necessary for me to use that? Like, how am I going to use AI agents in Salesforce if my systems are not even close to being set up to take advantage of this? So, and I have a lot of stories about that, but I don't think that the customers know where the data is coming from, and then how the AI agents are actually going to function to actually be a useful tool. What's your thought with the co-pilot with the AI agents? Or
I mean, it's very interesting at this point of time. I don't think anybody knows, how this is going to evolve and which is going to have more business value, unless we see a practical case that how companies are utilizing them. Right now, I mean, this war is really for Wall Street, because obviously they are trying to grab money, right? So I get it. I mean, what vendors are trying to do, but at the same time, when you look at the practical side of things, I mean, it's a long game. It's going to take some time for them to understand what is going to drive the real business value. Both approaches could be great, and they could be equally worse in my personal experience.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, if you are going to have any sort of closing advice, I know we are close to our time. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. So closing advice, and let's say if people want to find you, how can they find you, Robert?
So I am on LinkedIn and on Twitter. You can follow me there. I will make sure that we drop in my my usernames, etc. Also my email. Look forward to helping anybody out, answering any questions. I have a lot of ERP experience, but I'm also open to hear, your thoughts and what you might think about ERP and the trends and your experiences, success or failures, because the challenges are really interesting. I always like to hear what companies have overcome in order to be successful, and things that we might have talked about that you might disagree with. We're happy to have that discussion, because that's a nice one to have. So thank you.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much once again, Robert, for your time and insights. You're a rock star,
Thank you.
And I'm super honored to have you, as part of this show. So that's a wrap, guys. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our podcast series, for which we meet every Friday between 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. So make sure you guys stay tuned for the next episodes. We are going to bring very exciting guests here. On that note, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.